The 1960s was a decade of turbulence and transition. Wars were fought on battlefields, but they were also waged on film reels. Directors dared to expose truths governments preferred hidden. Some films were too brutal, too honest, too politically dangerous to be seen. They were buried, censored, silenced. Yet their stories remain, fragile, enduring, waiting to be rediscovered. Today we uncover 12 war films of the 1960s the world tried to suppress. 1. The War Game, 1966. Imagine a quiet English suburb. Children laugh in the streets. A mother sets dinner on the table. Then, without warning, a blinding flash fills the horizon. Ash drifts from the sky like ghostly confetti. Sirens wail. The world ends, not with Hollywood spectacle, but with suffocating realism. This is the opening terror of The War Game, Peter Watkins' unflinching pseudo-documentary. Shot with documentary precision, it depicts the immediate aftermath of a nuclear strike on Britain. The camera lingers on ordinary people, fathers shielding their families, nurses unable to cope, soldiers enforcing order with rifles in trembling hands. It wasn't escapism. It was prophecy, presented in stark black and white frames that looked like newsreels. When the BBC reviewed it in 1965, executives recoiled. Government officials warned it could cause public panic. Too bleak, too hopeless, too real. The decision was made. It would not be shown on television. Instead, the film was shelved, locked away like a dangerous weapon. And yet, despite suppression, it won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 1967. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, but the British public wouldn't see it until 1985, 20 years later, when nuclear fears still haunted the Cold War. The War Game endures because it stripped away illusion. It forced viewers to confront survival not as heroism, but as agony. In silencing it, the government revealed its power. Sometimes the most dangerous film is not the one about war, but the one about what comes after. 2. The Battle of Algiers, 1966. A narrow alley in Algiers. The sound of boots on cobblestones. Women, their faces veiled, slip unnoticed into a cafe, carrying handbags heavy with explosives. A moment later, chaos erupts. Civilians scream. Smoke fills the streets. These scenes, shot with a trembling handheld camera, feel like stolen footage. That was the brilliance of the Battle of Algiers, Gillo Pontecorvo's incendiary chronicle of Algeria's fight for independence from France. Mixing professional soldiers with non-actors, Pontecorvo blurred the line between cinema and reportage. The film follows resistance fighters of the FLN as they battle French paratroopers in a brutal war of ambushes, reprisals, and torture. There are no clean heroes, no triumphant victories, only survival, terror, and loss. For the French government, it was unbearable. Too soon after their humiliating withdrawal from Algeria, the film was banned for years. Veterans groups called it offensive. Politicians feared it would stoke rebellion in the streets of Paris. Even in the United States, it was viewed with suspicion, screened quietly by the Pentagon as a lesson in counterinsurgency. But beyond censorship, the Battle of Algiers became legend. Rebels in Latin America studied it. Military strategists analyzed it. Critics crowned it a masterpiece. It is one of the rare films that exist both as art and as weapon, feared by governments, cherished by audiences. Today, it reminds us of cinema's dangerous power, that a camera, when turned on oppression, can be as threatening as a rifle. 3. Le Petit Soldat, 1960. A smoky cafe in Geneva. A young man sits at a corner table, nervously watching the door. Across from him, a beautiful woman lights a cigarette, her expression unreadable. Their romance is fragile, tender, yet poisoned by secrets neither dares to reveal. This is Jean-Luc Godard's Le Petit Soldat, a meditation on politics, love, and betrayal during the Algerian War. Its protagonist, Bruno, is a French soldier turned reluctant spy, torn between loyalty to his government and the pull of conscience. His lover, Veronica, played by Anna Karina, becomes both muse and symbol of passion, of compromise, of complicity. Their relationship mirrors a nation divided. The film was daring not for spectacle, but for what it showed quietly: the torture of prisoners, the moral collapse of those ordered to inflict it. France, still embroiled in Algeria's bloody conflict, recoiled. The censors banned it in 1960, fearing it would inflame an already fractured public. Only in 1963, after the war had ended, was it finally released. For Godard, the ban only amplified his reputation as cinema's enfant terrible. For audiences, the delay gave the film an aura of forbidden truth. Critics would later hail it as one of Godard's most politically charged works, a film that blurred the personal and the political, love and war, art and protest. Its legacy is not just cinematique, it is ethical. It reminds us that the battlefield is not only out there in the world, but inside the human heart. Quatrième. Tu ne tueras point, 1961. Un soldat s'assied seul dans une cellule de pierre, ses mains pliées, ses yeux inébranlables. Outside, fellow soldiers prepare for battle. Inside, he has made his choice. He will not kill. This was the radical premise of Claude Autant-Lara's Tu ne tueras point, Thou shalt not kill. The story follows a conscientious objector during World War II, imprisoned for refusing to take a life. Unlike other war films of the era, which glorified sacrifice, this one posed a dangerous question. Is the greatest act of courage refusing to obey? The film unfolds not with grand battles, but with intimate confrontations. Guards taunt him, officials pressure him. Fellow prisoners either mock or admire him. His moral stand becomes a mirror, forcing others to confront their own compromises. It is a war, film stripped of spectacle, focusing instead on the war within. France's authorities were not ready for such defiance. Released in 1961, with the country still scarred by its colonial wars, the film was swiftly banned for 2 years. Its pacifist message was deemed subversive, its timing incendiary. Yet when it returned, critics praised its stark bravery. It was not a box office hit, but it carved its place in cinematic history as a rare wartime drama that dared to elevate conscience over combat. Its relevance endures in every era where obedience is demanded. Tu ne tueras point whispers. A truth governments fear most, that sometimes the quiet refusal of one man can echo louder than the orders of an entire army. 5. Higher Principle, 1960. A classroom in Czechoslovakia. The walls are cracked with age, chalk dust floats in the air, and an old teacher speaks to his students with quiet conviction. The higher principle is that you must not kill. His voice trembles, not from weakness, but from knowing the price of such words. This is Higher Principle, a Czech film directed by Jiří Krejčík. Set during the Nazi occupation, it follows students accused of resistance after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. Their teacher, an elderly man of wisdom and courage, becomes their unlikely defender. The story unfolds not with gunfire, but with words, dangerous, unyielding words. In post-war West Germany, the film struck too close. It presented German soldiers not as noble men, but as instruments of cruelty, faceless enforcers of a machine. For a nation still struggling with its image, this was unacceptable. The film was banned until 1965, hidden away for its anti-German overtones. Yet its message transcended borders. Higher Principle was not about one nation, but about morality itself. When laws demand blood, does conscience demand defiance? The film's suppression only gave it greater weight, and when it re-emerged, critics recognized it as one of the most courageous dramas of its time. Today, it remains a reminder that war is not fought only with weapons. It is fought with principles, fragile but enduring. And sometimes, the bravest battlefield is a classroom. 6. Paths of Glory, suppressed in the 60s. The trenches of World War I stretch endlessly. Mud, smoke, and broken bodies litter the landscape. In the distance, French soldiers are ordered to attack. An attack everyone knows is suicide. Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory, 1957, was released earlier than the 60s, but its suppression echoed throughout that decade. The film follows Colonel Dax, played with quiet intensity by Kirk Douglas, as he defends 3 soldiers unfairly accused of cowardice. It is a war film stripped of romance, No glory, no honor, only futility. The generals are portrayed as arrogant, detached from the horror their orders create. France banned it until 1975. Spain, under Franco's dictatorship, held it back until 1986. Even in Switzerland, it was banned from military screenings. American military bases refused to show it. Everywhere it went, governments feared its message, that the real enemy in war may be the generals who command. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, and today it is studied as one of the greatest anti-war films ever made. But in the 1960s, it was a ghost, talked about in whispers, seen only by those lucky enough to catch illicit screenings abroad. Its endurance lies in its truth. Paths of Glory reminds us that the cost of war is not only in lives lost, but in justice denied. Seventh Commissar, 1967. A dusty road in the Soviet Union. Soldiers march in endless lines, their boots pounding the earth like drums of inevitability. Among them, a female commissar arrives at a Jewish household, bringing with her not only orders, but the weight of the revolution itself. Commissar, directed by Alexander Askoldov, was unlike any war film the Soviet Union had ever produced. Instead of glorifying the Red Army, it dared to show the human cost of war, and even worse, it portrayed Jewish characters with sympathy, compassion, and dignity at a time when Soviet propaganda raised such narratives. The story follows Klavdia, a commissar who stays with a Jewish family while awaiting her unit's orders. What begins as political duty becomes deeply personal as she confronts her role as both soldier and mother. The film blends the intimate with the ideological, revealing contradictions the regime wanted hidden. Authorities reacted swiftly. Branded as anti-Soviet, the film was banned in 1967 and locked away for 20 years. Askoldov himself was blacklisted, his career destroyed. Commissar became a lost relic, unseen until the late 1980s, when Glasnost finally allowed its release. When audiences finally saw it, they were stunned. Here was a war film that humanized the very people the state had tried to erase. Its suppression was proof of its power. Today, it endures not only as cinema, but as testimony that even in silence, art can wait, survive, and rise again. 8. The Glass Harmonica, 1968. An empty city square. Statues of leaders loom over the people, cold and immovable. A glass harmonica plays, its eerie notes cutting through silence. The townspeople listen, and for a moment, they feel free. Then soldiers arrive, smashing the instrument, silencing the music, restoring order. This was The Glass Harmonica, a Soviet animated film unlike anything else of its time. Directed by Andrei Kurzanovsky, it wasn't about battles or soldiers. It was about power, obedience, and the soul of a nation. The war it portrayed was internal, the war between authority and imagination. The film's surreal imagery spoke in metaphors, leaders exploiting the masses, artists silenced, truth crushed under the weight of propaganda. For Soviet censors, there was no mistaking its meaning. They banned it almost immediately, labeling it dangerous, subversive, and anti-authoritarian. Though short, barely 20 minutes long, its impact was immense. For decades, it remained unseen, whispered about like a forbidden poem. Only after the fall of the Soviet Union did it re-emerge, shocking viewers with its boldness. Its message remains timeless, that tyranny fears art, perhaps more than it fears armies. The Glass Harmonica reminds us that the battle for freedom can be fought with a single haunting note, and that sometimes music is more dangerous than war itself. 9. Andrei Rublev, 1966. A rider gallops across a bleak Russian landscape. Smoke curls from villages. Bells toll faintly in the distance. At the heart of this epic vision is not a soldier, but a painter. Andrei Rublev, the medieval icon maker, caught in the violence of 15th century Russia. Directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, Andrei Rublev is not a conventional war film, but war bleeds through every frame. Tatar raids, burning towns, and the despair of peasants frame the artist's spiritual journey. It is a meditation on creativity in times of destruction, on how beauty survives amidst brutality. For Soviet authorities, the film was unbearable. Its religious themes defied the state's atheism. Its depiction of cruelty and despair clashed with the official optimism of Soviet cinema. Completed in 1966, it was immediately shelved. For years, it circulated only in censored forms, stripped of its most powerful scenes. The uncut version would not appear until the 1970s, and even then, only in the West. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, a war film without battles, where the enemy was not an army, but despair itself. Tarkovsky framed war as the great silencer of art, yet also the crucible that gives art meaning. Today it is considered one of the greatest films ever made. Its suppression only proves its truth. Art that survives war is the greatest rebellion. The 10th, Le Petit Soldat's Companion in Silence, the censorship of French war. Films. The 1960s in France was a battleground not only in Algeria, but in its cinemas. Alongside Le Petit Soldat, another film dared to speak the unspeakable. René Vautier's works, like Afrique cinquante and his later Avoir 20 ans dans les oreilles, carried the same fire. But even his voice was smothered by censors. The climate itself became the ban. Authorities feared war films that showed torture, pacifism, or divided loyalties. They delayed releases, demanded cuts, or erased entire reels from circulation. The suppression of films like Tu ne tueras point and Le Petit Soldat wasn't isolated. It was systemic, a wall of silence erected by a state that knew cinema could be as dangerous as protest. Though not every title has survived in equal prominence, the very act of suppression made these films resonate louder. They became whispered about, sought out by cinephiles and rebels alike. The ban itself was proof that the truth was too powerful to be shown. This collective censorship remains one of the hidden scars of French cinema. It reminds us that war doesn't only wound the body, it wounds memory, and sometimes governments do everything they can to keep those wounds unseen. 11. The suppressed broadcasts, Combat, and The Rat Patrol. The screen flickers with the sight of American soldiers charging across European fields. Combat, 1962 to 67, and The Rat Patrol, 1966 to 68, were television's attempts to dramatize World War II, but not every audience was permitted to see them. In West Germany, where the wounds of war were still raw, officials launched campaigns to suppress such programming. They feared depictions of the Wehrmacht as brutal or incompetent, fearing it would reopen national shame. Even popular shows were pulled, edited, or censored. It wasn't that the shows were radical. In America, they were mainstream entertainment, but in Germany, they were dynamite. Governments knew images could shape identity, and in the 1960s, identity was fragile. Better to silence uncomfortable stories than let them stir debate. These TV war dramas, forgotten by many today, became part of the censorship landscape of the decade. Their suppression reveals an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, even ordinary television can become too dangerous when history itself is on the line. 12. The Forgotten Casualties, when cinema itself was the battlefield. The final entries in this hidden history aren't single films, but the collective silence around war cinema in the 1960s. Across continents, governments feared what war films might ignite. In France, films that hinted at colonial brutality were silenced. In Britain, the nuclear nightmare of the war game was locked away. In the Soviet Union, films like Commissar and The Glass Harmonica were banned for decades. In Germany, films like Higher Principle were struck from screens for their uncomfortable truths. The bans tell us as much about politics as about cinema. These were not just movies. They were mirrors, showing nations their own scars. Authorities smashed the mirrors, thinking that would erase the reflection. But the truth lingered. Today, when we watch these films, we see not only their stories, but the silence that surrounded them. We remember that cinema itself was once a battlefield, and in some ways, still is. Cinema is memory, and memory is dangerous. The war films of the 1960s remind us that truth can be banned, but never buried. These suppressed stories still breathe, still demand to be seen. Subscribe, like, and join us again as we uncover more films the world tried and failed to silence.